Hello, YouTube. It's been a little while since I've published any video on the Flutter June YouTube channel. Kind of bringing a little bit of an homage back to some of the early days that we had for the Flutter videos specific to Charlotte as we were having our meetings a few years ago.
Yeah.
I'm John Manning. I'm a practicing emergency medicine physician and Google developer expert in Charlotte, North Carolina.
And I am Ryan Edge. I am a staff mobile engineer, and I am also a Google developer expert in Flutter and Dart.
How are you doing, Ryan?
Not bad. How about you?
I'm all right. You know, one of the interesting things for me as I found my way in a path to Google developer expert was the recordings that we had earlier as we were having recorded meetups. I was listening to and video editing them and hearing you speak and hearing many other developer experts and others in the Flutter community speak. And doing that video editing got me more knowledge and experience in Flutter, which hit me to this point as now also a Flutter GDE as well. So thank you. Thank you for you and the others that were on this channel years ago, because that helped me learn so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. That means I got at least one satisfied customer.
Yes, absolutely you did. The really cool thing that we have here as an opportunity at in Mountain View, California, is doing this live session, which we'll have on the channel, in addition to some of the GDE Summit talk that I gave earlier today, introducing a application that we're building in North Carolina to help with patients that are in rural areas. So this is kind of that extra deep dive into a functionally sourced application that's already being used in one of the 8 counties that we have intended for this.
And it's an open source project, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's open source with a little star. So officially it is functionally sourced, which means that if you want to use this for any use case that doesn't directly compete with this project, please do it. It's MIT. If you want to directly compete, then you have to use a commit that's 2 years behind if you're using that code. So it gives a little bit of a time delay as we're continuing to build. And that whole concept of a functionally sourced product came from Sentry with an intent of trying to avoid harmful free writing practices while still contributing to the greater community. And I think that's a great balance between the two. It's also important to note that this uses a thing called FHIR-FLI, which is the healthcare data standard, FHIR, which is Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. That was around since 2012. It is the global standard for interoperability of healthcare data. It is government mandated for certain electronic medical record use cases in the United States. And it's really a global endeavor and has been for years. If you're ever building stuff with healthcare data and you want to exchange that interoperably, you should be using FHIR. FHIR-FLI takes the FHIR standard in its entirety and connects it into Flutter. So FHIR with Flutter library integration. And significant thanks to a longtime colleague of ours and collaborator, Gray Falconberry out of Atlanta, for all of his efforts spearheading this. This is almost 8 million lines of JSON brought in, with about 2 million lines of Dart taken out, that allow you to have, patient as its own serializable and deserialized class in your Flutter application. It includes the RESTful API queries, authentication and authorization, and some extra stuff, including what's called FHIR path, which is basically custom scripting in a JSON format to transform some of the data that you have. As of now, there are about 16,000 downloads a month, and developers from over 7 countries have reached out to Gray or myself with positive reinforcement of the efforts that we're doing. So really, in summary, if you're building something for Google, if you're building something for healthcare and you use native Android, use Google's Open Health Stack. It's excellent. But if you're building something in Flutter, you should use FHIR-FLI, at least today, because there's nothing that comes anywhere close. So Let's take a step back all the way to the bedside. This is Tim. He's 73 years old. He just finished mowing the lawn. And man, his chest right in the center is just really uncomfortable. It doesn't hurt, but it's a lot of discomfort and it's like a crushing sensation. He's really sweaty. He's really nauseous. His wife looks at him, is worried that he may be having a heart attack, and he is. She calls an ambulance, and he lives 5 minutes away from a major emergency department and hospital that has the abilities to care for his massive heart attack called a ST-Elevation Myocardial Infarction, or STEMI. Mm-hmm. The definitive treatment for Tim is a balloon to open the area where his heart is clogged and to place stents, one or multiple, to help save his life. But if Tim lives 15 minutes away from the hospital, or 45, as he gets further and further away from the hospital, his likelihood of having this good outcome is much worse. It's a linear increase in bad outcomes once you get past that first medical contact until intervention time period of 90 minutes. And if Tim lives in a rural area as compared to an urban one, his likelihood of that bad outcome is 8 times higher. So the application that we're showing today is called navSTEMI, and as I mentioned, it's functionally sourced. And it essentially has those variations of, well, map navigation to either the nearest PCI center or cath lab so that he can have this intervention. But if it seems like it's taking too long, or there's a lot of issues that are barriers for him to have timely definitive care, we need to reroute to the nearest emergency department. And this will help quickly swap between those two locations. When we did design thinking and in-user sessions with the medics and paramedics in the county that we're first implementing this in, they told us the specific information that they needed to activate the catheterization labs. And so we built the app purposefully around just those patient demographics that are needed, the time information, and the navigation to help with his care. Really, from a healthcare API perspective, it's maps, it's routes, it's the Google navigation, and then afterwards we have some things that connect to and from FHIR-FLI. The list of emergency departments is on there, as well as the survey data that medics and paramedics are giving post-hoc. So let's look through at least a little bit in terms of what's being addressed here, as well as how you can get started if you are interested in using these packages yourself. So first, we'll link these in the show notes, but the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality has a great publication that they did in their year in review, talking about what this process was planned to be and where we were at the time whenever we first designed it. And if you're interested in looking at the code at any point, you can go to github.com/FHIR-June/nav_STEMI, STEMI, and you can see all of this in real time. I mentioned some of the APIs, and I think it's worth just going through some of them as you look on where this is in the architecture itself. But the architecture is one that was originally or very well described by Andrea Bassotto, another fellow GDE, whose online content is excellent. And Code with Andrea, the website specifically gives this Flutter app architecture with Riverpod that has a difference between the presentation layer and the controllers that can call the service. The application layer, which is basically that glue that allows you to connect with different services and repositories if you need to. The domain layer that has your models, and then the data transfer objects, and to see where those are relevant as well. You already saw some of the demo on the left side of that slide, but just to walk you through briefly, you have the ability to sign in, to view prior encounters, which is still being actively built as of the time of this recording. The ability to add data or to press go at the very beginning. If you pressed add data at the very beginning, it's a different workflow, but it's still, you can swap between them however you'd like. And then if you have a location that you're heading to, so let's say we're heading to this PCI center directly, you'll be able to see all the steps. And then you'll actually have a ETA, and you'll see that information over on this screen as well, which if there's no destination, you wouldn't have it before. These time metrics and patient info, I think, are some of the most important as you're looking through this. So let's go through just two quick things for the architecture itself, and then we'll look at, I'll just say a quick trick that we have in terms of being able to manage app flavors that connect to different APIs. And I think that's going to be a really good start for just beginning the deep dive into this. What do you think?
I think so too.
Okay. All right. So if you're looking at the app itself, under the lib folder, you'll see that we have different variations for dev, stage, and production. And the source, this is all a feature-based architecture. I think it probably makes the most sense to, if you're first looking at this, go to add data and see the domain for patient information and the time metrics, because I think that's really where the majority of this application is set, with the other large chunk of tasks and features being in that Google Maps and navigation section. So a patient information model, patient info model, has basic demographics of last name, first name, middle initial, birth date, etc., as well as a flag that says whether or not the model needs to be synced to the cloud. The interesting thing from here is in the app itself, you can scan a driver's license. And when you do that, it will pull in the mobile scanner pub.dev package, which will create a driver's license class. And this is the only time that, one of essentially two times that this mobile scanner package is referenced in code, so that if we need to swap things out to different packages in the future, it's really easy to do. And this is that transfer from a patient info model to a driver's license. And realistically, more likely, you're going to take a driver's license and convert it into that info model. I mentioned FHIR earlier in this lecture as we were talking, or in this YouTube video. And the interesting thing when you're looking at the FHIR representation is that the data transfer objects are a lot more complex, because it's not just first name, it's a separate class called human name, which has a first, it's basically a list. And then you may have the family name or given names, which family is going to be a single string, given is going to be a list of strings. So if you have a first name and a middle name, and then the last name, this is how we're doing all of that conversion. So we've done our best to try and take all of the nuance and complexities of FHIR to first make it fully serialized so that you can see the classes that are represented here. And second, to have these data transfer objects to make your life as easy as possible as you are harnessing, what otherwise would be, sounds like a really simple thing. All you need is last name, first name, middle name, right? Well, it's not as simple as that if you want to be able to exchange this data in an interoperable fashion. I think that's a great part for the data transfer as well as the domain. And when we're thinking through, all right, well, how is that stored? Well, patient info repository is essentially a stream that you can get to see the memory that this patient info model is being stored at. And the various CRUD operations that are tied to that as well. This builds a lot of information from the InMemoryStore, which comes directly from Andrea Bizzotto. If you're looking in our code, if there's anything we're specifically referencing from someone else's excellent code that's also MIT licensed, we'll do our best to actually give you the direct location so that you can look through and see other implementations of that same concept. So I think that's probably good for the architecture itself.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good rundown.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the flavors, as well as how you can get started in your code as well.
Do you want to talk a little bit about why flavors are important?
Absolutely. Yeah, and this is a really good point. So if you're working with healthcare data, as an example, your actual patient data in production should never have test patients or vice versa. Like, I'm showing you how you can scan a driver's license. You do not want that to be stored in FHIR unless you know that that is secure. And so at least at this point or the time of this recording, and as we update it in code, we've set a safety cutoff for the stage environment where if I don't want this to actually be synced, I can see that this is actually in demo mode and know for a fact that I can scan a license, for example, without worrying about this getting converted into a patient data class and then syncing to a FHIR server, which would be bad. So dev is where you're making your most architectural changes. It's the cutting edge of what you're building. Stage for us is where things are being reviewed by our end users. And for this example, it's medics, paramedics, and people that right now are using this in real examples, but without any of that information being stored to the cloud, at least for the current stage that this project is in. And production should only be live patient data in a use case like this. And with the proper tools, BAAs, and auditing in place to make sure that you're doing this properly. Yeah, great example. And so when you're using a app flavor, and I think this is where this gets really fun, especially as we're building upon the ideas from others. At least right now, the way that this code is set up is we're using a flavor-based launch parameters in the launch.json settings in VS Code. So if you're in VS Code, when you open this, you can see development, staging, and production. And they will all point to a separate .env/ either development, staging, or production file, .env file. And in those files, for at least for now, for development and staging, if you want to connect to the Maps API, Directions API, Distance Matrix, Routes, and Maps API key, those are the things that you need. We'll end up cleaning this up a little bit more, so it's probably worth checking the README file to know exactly which of those. But Google Client, for now, that's for iOS so that you can use Google Sign-In without having to hard code your API key. Especially, we want dev to be pointing to something that's completely separate from stage. FHIR base URI, this is the whatever healthcare FHIR server that you're connecting to. And we are using service accounts, at least in the dev environment, but we don't suggest using this in stage or production environments because it's a lot easier to just click the sign in button and move and have a service account and make those changes. But it's not a good idea to do that without a full authentication with a service such as Google Sign-In or other OAuth 2 opportunities, which is what FHIR uses all the time. So if you're setting this up and you want it to connect to Maps, you need to at least have a Maps API key and Routes API. What these are defined as, you'll see in the main folder env.dart, as well as specifications for where those are coming from and what each one of these actually means. And whenever you're looking through a lot of, so for example, Google Maps in pub.dev, when you go there and you're actually in Google Maps Flutter today, they will give you examples of geo.api key and putting in your key here in the Android manifest.xml file, as well as putting your API key here in the appdelegate.swift file. And that's fine if you're doing local development, but there's two challenges with this for us. First, this is a functionally sourced application available on GitHub. And I don't want all of these API keys to be available and published here. Second, I need these API keys to change based on flavor. And that's really, really important for this project. So let's take a look at Android first, and then we'll go over to iOS. And I think that's a pretty good spot to end for the first part of this deep dive.
Yeah.
So for Android, when you go to app build.gradle, what ends up happening is if you include, and again, we're providing sources for all of this, but you can include Dart defines here in your build.gradle file, which you can then assign as a resource as maps underscore API underscore key with that Dart define that was set up earlier and shown in the production.env file. And then this underscored maps API key is what you'll actually reference as string / maps API key in lieu of using the direct API key. When you're in the iOS environment, you can also, so this is now camel case instead of the, snake case?
Yes.
Instead of the snake case. And so we're using that Dart define of maps API key again, but we now have it as a variable that we are now able to define. And so let maps API key equal to the object from this dictionary. And then we're using that in lieu of hard coding an API key into either of these sections.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So for any of you that aren't building things in healthcare, if you're still doing a dev stage and production environment, please make use of the launch.json. The Dart defines whenever you're actually building stuff, as well as some of these nice little tricks so that you're not hard coding an API key in the various Android and iOS sections.
Yeah, it seems like a very straightforward pattern for passing in environment variables all the way from your Dart layer to your native layer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other thoughts on what we're doing so far, Ryan?
No, I think everything looks great. I mean, the architecture is very straightforward and easy to follow. Again, the way that you're passing environmental variables down to the native side is very straightforward as well. Everything looks great to me.
Great. Thank you. If any of you are interested in getting involved in this project, just reach out to me. You can use the GitHub is probably the easiest way for contact. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's another very easy way to get in contact with me. And this is open source for a reason. So we greatly appreciate any that are interested in this healthcare technology space, especially around Flutter and FHIR-FLI. And bringing everything back. This is how I learned, and I hope that at least some of this is useful for those that are reviewing this.
If someone wanted to contribute, what would you say are features that you think are very important before this thing goes live?
I'd say that's a great question. Absolutely. When we're looking at what's been done so far and where we still have. So the sync between multiple users, I think, is going to be really interesting, especially because this is an offline first scenario. There are a lot of times where you have very spotty internet connection when you're in a rural area. And that's the reason why our current testing isn't storing anything for patient data, because we want to see exactly what that's like in the field. But there are two users, two separate paramedics, one that's driving and one that's putting in information. And that ability to do multi-user sync in an area that is maybe internet poor would be very helpful. The other aspect that would be very helpful, at least before this ships, would be the area of viewing prior encounters and being able to review something that you and your team had done, as well as being able to add others to the care team of this group. So I think probably as a Flutter developer, or from a pure developer's perspective, the sync and share with others would be a lot easier as a good first issue to work on and to collaborate on. Because when we're looking at the encounters, then it starts pulling in some of that nuanced data of working with FHIR and its complexities and making sure we're showing everything right. But if you've got FHIR experience and you're interested in this, then by all means, we'd love to collaborate. Awesome. So without further ado, again, I'm John Manning.
And I'm Ryan Edge.
And stay safe, everyone. Take care.